Hello, everyone, and welcome to our live today where we continue to talk about IEPs. And today we're going to talk about some of the special factors um, that can mold an IEP in different ways depending on the disability. Remember, as we've been talking about for the last couple of days, the most important thing to remember in any situation that involves assessment of the IEP is there has to be baseline data. There absolutely must be a starting point of where this child is now at this moment. This is where I have growing concern because most kids um, did not progress and meet their goals for last year's school year because of the either voluntary or optional or alternative learning that was occurring during the stay-at-home order. Of course, we don't know what education is going to look like in the fall, but when we're crafting these IEPs, it's critical that we have current baseline data to make measurable goals and monitor the progress. So with that being said, today we're going to talk um, about special factors in IEPs, and that's functional, that's behavior problems, limited English proficiency, blind or visually impaired, deaf or hearing impaired, or communication problems. And the communication problems that we're talking about are children who really struggle with speech and language, or children who just cannot speak. So with that being said, let's just dive right in and talk about behavioral problems. Um, and behavioral problems are often misconstrued as bad behavior when actually a child with a disability may use behavior for other functions. They may use behavior to stop doing something, to be able to do something else, to um, it may be their form of communication if they can't find the words. Um, and so it's very, very important that if a child is having behavioral problems, if they're in a disciplinary situation as well, that the school understands the function of those behavior problems. What is the purpose of that child behaving in that way? The way they do that is they do an assessment called a functional behavioral assessment, and that involves observation of the child in several different environments. It would be the classroom, recess, lunch, could be at home, it could be in an extracurricular activity. It just depends. And and when they're making these observations, it's very important for the observer to see what the trigger was. What did this child experience, or what happened right before the behavior, and also um, what happened right after. Um, Behavioral problems are really significant to figure out because it is something that causes children to be teased. They can be excluded. They can be bullied. It is disruptive to not only their own learning, but learning of others. And that's all very important to figure out. So, um, as I said, the Functional Behavioral Assessment, which is the SBA, another acronym, is the purpose is to identify the function of the behavior. And the data that's collected would then be analyzed by the IEP team. Usually it's a school psychologist, it could be a speech therapist, find occupational therapist, physical therapist, um, and then they can figure out what interventions are necessary. The interventions are figured out and then put in writing in a behavioral um, intervention plan, a BIP, and and the purpose of the BIP, and we talked about this a little bit the other day, is so that anyone working with this child, including the parents at home or or others within the school environment, knows if the child behaves in this way, this is what it means, this is how we're going to respond, this is our positive action plan that should work to correct the behavior or to understand the communication, which is what a lot of kids who have behavioral issues, it is their form of communication. So going back to the functional behavioral assessment, again, it should be an observation of your child in different settings. I've seen many of them where they only observe the child in the classroom, and that is not sufficient. Um, and then there's also a component where the actual instructors or teachers of the child have to answer some questions and submit reports. Anyone who works with the child would it would be helpful for them to obtain a report from them related to the behavior. Sometimes the evaluator interviews the child and the parents as well, but not always. The evaluation process basically is they identify the behavior that needs to change. They collect the data through observation on the behavior. They develop a hypothesis about the reason for that behavior. They develop interventions to help change the behavior. They collect data on the intervention, and then they use the data to evaluate the effectiveness of the intervention. So it could be a little touch and go. It's a little bit of guesswork to get to the point where the problem behaviors are addressed with some positive reinforcement or some response from others that can stop the behavior. If the child's behavior is having a negative impact on their ability to learn as well as on classmates' ability to learn, then that is when the IEP team should make the request for a functional behavioral assessment. The other time that a child is entitled to a functional behavioral assessment is in the disciplinary context if there's a change in the child's placement, which means that they have been out of their daily usual place for a period of 10 days. That is considered a change of placement. So it could be a suspension, it could be an expulsion, it could be going to a different program, different class, it could be one-on-one learning. If any of them happen for more than 10 days, then that is considered a change of placement. So what exactly is a BIP? It's designed to teach and reinforce positive behavior. So a behavioral intervention plan, a BIP, basically has skills training to increase appropriate behavior. It could have changes in the classroom or other environments to reduce or eliminate the behaviors. So if the function of the behavior is that the child, can't sit still that long, then and so that's why they start to jump on the desk, then the way to resolve that would be to have the availability for them to move onto a couch or be able to leave the room and walk around for a minute or two and come back. But whatever it says in the BIP, it has to be understood that whenever Joey dances on the desk or jumps on the desk, that this is what the intervention is going to be. So then when you feel that coming on, he will just go to the couch or go take a walk instead of jumping on the desk. So that's just an example. It has to include strategies to replace the problem behaviors with appropriate behaviors. And there should be supports for the child to use the appropriate behaviors, a couch in the room. And then there should be data collection to monitor the child's progress and be able to tell if the interventions are working or not, or if it needs to be reevaluated. The requirements for functional behavioral assessments and BIPs do differ from state by state. state to state. So that's just something to be cautious of. It's really, really important that the BIP is monitored frequently and that changes are made accordingly. And um, if and it functional behavioral assessment and a BIP can be requested by parents. A lot of times they don't realize that they have the ability to do that. But if your child is having excessive discipline or just not progressing, then this may be a step that you want to take. You would ask you would write a letter to the special education director and copy it to the principal and the head of the IEP team. If you request it, then they have to do it. And again, in this period where we don't really know baseline data for our children, and they're going to be doing assessments on many, many children as soon as we're back in school, that this was a great time to ask for this if you feel that that's appropriate for your child. The next special factor that has to be dealt with in IEP meetings is if a child has limited English proficiency. It's very, very significant because if they're not proficient in English, then how are they going to be proficient in science or social studies or history or anything else? So with that in mind, the IEP team has to make decisions about how the child's limited English affects their need for special education and related services. And some of the things that they're going to look at is if they should have education in their native language or should it be in English. That's always a component that they're going to look at. Again, a letter from the parent is very helpful in explaining your child's proficiency. It's important for the educators to know if they speak English at home or if they speak their native language at home, and if there is anyone who is bilingual in the home who speaks both English and the native tongue. It's there also may need to have tutoring for English in addition to the classes in English that are available in school. A child who doesn't have English proficiency may need test accommodations. They may need increased time so they can translate the directions into their native language and understand it, but it has to be in the IEP. If a child has a disability and limited English, I get asked often if he's entitled to a speech language pathologist, and the answer is maybe. It depends on the individual child, and there'll need to be an assessment to see if that is something needed. The plus of a speech language pathologist is that they're really, really helpful in being able to give advice or um, or information about supports and modifications to the learning environment that would help the child learn. So again, these are modifications, not accommodations, and we learned about those yesterday. And you're actually going to modify either the classroom or the curriculum depending on where the child is with their proficiency in English. Other things that a speech and language pathologist can do in this circumstance is help the classroom teacher find ways to take the child's language skills into account during instruction, to help the classroom teacher understand the differences in the communication styles of children with limited English skills, help children who are eligible for speech language services learn the structure, meaning, and use of English, and teach the child's parents how to use language simulation activities. So whatever is being done in school, the parents really have to be part of the team and doing the same things at home. Children can learn language very, very rapidly, but they have to have support all around them to really keep pace and bust through it all as we know they can. Our next category is the blind or visually impaired students. and there will need to be assessments to determine if the child needs to read with Braille or if the child has some site that allows them to have special text or special lighting or black background with white letters versus white background with black letters. And so all of that and the ability to read and write print materials, it all has to be assessed, and then the learning medium will be decided what's best for your child. It's really important to understand that the learning medium can change with age. So depending on the different characteristics of the individual child's blind or visual impairment, that's going to determine if they may need to switch to Braille from print, or they may be able to go the other way. So it's really, really important. It's also important to look at assistive technology. Both eyeglasses and hearing aids are considered assistive technology devices, and they can fall under the related services or supplementary aids section of the IEP. If the IEP team decides that the student needs glasses or hearing aids in order to learn, then they have to be given those devices in order for there to be FAPE, free and appropriate public education. As far as the law is concerned with Braille, the IEP team has the ability to decide based on the evaluation if instruction in Braille is appropriate or not. It doesn't give any more, it really doesn't give any more detail than that. However, it does say that they must conduct an evaluation of the child's reading and writing skills and appropriate reading and writing media. So your child has to not only be evaluated for where they are right now and what they need right now, but also it should be anticipated where they'll be in the future and how they're learning and how their learning is impaired, and how it can be assisted. If it's determined that the child needs textbooks in Braille, the district must provide that. And the IEP would include that under special education services, related services, and supplementary aids and services section of the IEP. Remember that the child's unique needs are what is the key factor when we're evaluating if FAPE has been delivered to a child. The additional assessments for blind or visually impaired students, they can have a functional vision assessment, and that determines their ability to adapt or to modify testing and instruction to meet the unique needs of the child. Another one is a learning media assessment that identifies the best reading format for the child. Is it print, Braille, audio, or a combination? And this is really helpful, the LMA, the Learning Media Assessment, for the IEP team to really understand how your child learns, which tells them a better way to educate your child because they're not always the same. As far as deaf or hearing impaired, the school is required to provide the services they need, including interpreting skills. And that would come under services and related services section of the IEP. There is a comprehensive psychoeducational evaluation that needs to be done. There's also an evaluation called the Comprehensive Speech and Language Assessment. There's also the child's evaluation should include observation in all settings within school: gym, lunch, classroom, computer lab, home, and the community. It's really important that parents discuss with the team how the child communicates at home. How do they communicate with their siblings? How do they communicate with their friends? There may be an instance where their language and communication needs include direct instruction um, as well as indirect instruction, but it's all in the same communication mode. There must be opportunities throughout the day for the child to communicate with peers or classmates and teachers, and there may be assistive technology needs, and those can be, the different picture boards is one example that we see often. And so it's very important for the team to be educated as to how the child learns and communicates. Um, if the school refuses interpretation services at an extracurricular activity, you need to just amend your IEP to include interpretation services at basketball camp or at debate club or whatever the child is interested in, because the IDEA is very specific that it's academic, non-academic, extracurricular activities that should be included in the IEP. Remember, if a child without a disability can participate, then the child with a disability should be able to as well. And if they need accommodations or supports in order to do that, they should be given. Lastly, communication problems. This is the most difficult area I've found for educators and parents in the IEP team to get it right. Because children with communication problems also usually have social and behavioral problems. So you're going to have a little bit of an overlap with a functional behavioral assessment and a BIP. And it's really, really important to note what different behaviors mean as far as this particular child communicating. And although speech is a way to communicate, there are other ways. And when we observe this child in a social context, you can see different ways that a nonverbal child can get their message across. And it's especially important for parents and caregivers to be involved in this, because they can usually the child has a way they communicate at home, whatever. And because it's a different environment and the school professionals may not know what that is, often that is something that parents really need to communicate. There should be a comprehensive assessment of the child's communication abilities, and if they should and to determine if the child needs services from a specialist who can teach in a functional method of communication. An appropriate intervention program usually includes, it develops communicative intent, it establishes an efficient and appropriate way to communicate, and it expands the range of communicative functions or purposes. It also develops the ability to respond and initiate communication and develop strategies to repair breakdowns in communication. So those are really important to be considered. And as I said, the more input parents have as part of the team in this area specifically is the most important. Rett syndrome, RETT, is a disability where a child has severely impaired expressive language. The IEP team can seek outside support in order to put together a mode of communication for these students. The need for assistive technology is great with these students in order to meet their needs. Some of the low-tech devices are, again, the picture boards, head pointers, switches to activate a computer program. They might use voice output devices and a computer so they can access the general education curriculum. The whole thing about these 5 areas that I just discussed that we need to remember is that these kids uh, they're learning their IQ, their ability to process information is not necessarily the issue. It's their ability to express the information or to uh, observe and intake the information to process it to get the output that's desired. So these are very special circumstances, special factors that need to be uh, encouraged and considered in formulating a lawful IEP that ensures FAPE. And as you probably guessed from all of this, the biggie here is that you have to have assessments and evaluations, and you have to understand the disability. So, with that, I will wish you all goodbye for today. I will see you tomorrow at 1 o'clock, and I hope that you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the day. Tomorrow, we'll talk about assistive technology, and if we have time, we'll start talking about some other assessments and testing tools that are available to help parents understand. Have a great day.